This shiur touches on a very interesting sugya in Hilchos Gzela. So, in the Shulchan Aruch, this is in Siman Shin Samach Vav Siv Aleph, and the sugya of Gemara is a self-contained sugya of Gemara in the 9th parak above Akam Tzadik Daled. So, it's a very interesting sugya. So, let's start with the sugya of Gemara. We'll go through the Rishonim and come and see how the Shulchan Aruch and the Psak Halacha L'Maisa, which we'll see which strands and which shitas it takes and what the underlying ideas are. So the Gemara brings 4 brisos, and these brisos are 3 out of 4 of them are in the Tosefta, and that's going to be relevant for some of the shitas Rishonim. 4 brisos which talk about whether a Gazlan who wants to return or comes to return his lost object, his stolen object, if we accept it from or not. So at face value, it says the pasuk says in Vayikra Parakeh V'Heshav Zagzela. It's a double pasuk that someone who steals has to return. It's a mitzvah essay, there's a mitzvah essay as well, meaning there's a monetary obligation as well as a mitzvah, a commandment to return the stolen object. And you have a lot of Mishnayos which talk about returning stolen object. However, we have a brisa. The sugya starts off with a brisa, which is the Tosefta in Shvius, which says Hagazlonon umalve beribis shirziru emekablim. There's a special takkanat that Chachamim made that, and the whole scope of the whole sugya will be dealing with, when does this apply, when does this not apply. But the brisa starts off with saying that Gazlonon umalve ribis, that return emekablim. If they want to return the object they stole, or they got through extortionate usury, we do not accept it from them. And someone who does take it back, even though Chachamim say ein ruach chacham nechemanu. So it's interesting. Most places we explain ein ruach chacham nechemanu, meaning that the Chacham are not happy with him. Rashi says that in many places as well. Over here it's interesting. Rashi says ein ruach chacham nechemanu, ein ruach chachma v'chasidus b'kir boy. So Mefarshim explain that you can't explain it like the regular way, that in Rucham Nechemanu, because we already said the Chum say in the Kaplan. So obviously this person is going as a Chum. The Chum are not happy. They're breaking their Gzera. They're takkanat. So obviously there's a different explanation over here. Okay, so that's brisa number 1, and that is the fundamental. That's the asserted of the sugya. We have this idea that in certain cases, certain circumstances, a Gazlan or someone who is Malva Beribis who wants to return, we do not. The Chum say not to accept it. So the Gemara goes and asks on this brisa from 3 other brises. But before that, the Gemara gives some background. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says that this brisa was said in the days of Rabbi. Again, the relevance of this will be explained according to some of the Shitas Rishonim. Bimei Rabbi Nishaz Mishazu. That this was said in the days of Rabbi, that there was a story, there was a certain person who was a thief, and all of a sudden he had heard tshuva, and he wanted to do tshuva, and his wife said, Reika, empty person, you come to do tshuva, afilu avne and shakha, even your belt, even your personal garments are not yours, and you're going to be left penniless. And then he started, my wife has a good point, and he didn't do tshuva. At that moment, the Chachamim said that if someone wants to do tshuva, we allow him to do tshuva, and in order to facilitate this tshuva, ein mekabel mehem. The Chachamim said, Oisa sham, amra gazlan and malvei ribiyos, shechziru ein mekabel mehem, but mekabel mehem en rocham nechemenu. If they come to do tshuva, if we do not take it from them, well, I don't want to be precise. We do not take it back from them, and if you do, in rocham nechem. Okay, so that's brisa number 1. Brisa number 2. The Gemara has a question from a brisa which is also in Tosefta, which says that if a person died and he left his kids, part of the estate was stolen objects or Moshe Ribbis. So over here it's talking about Moshe Ribbis. So the brisa says, the ratio of the brisa says, Heniach lemavia Moshe Ribbis. The kids don't have to return. That's mitzad dinei Yerusha, other dinim shinoi rishus. So the akopanim, the Gemara is medayik that it's mashma from the brisa that the kids, the children, the heirs do not have to return the mois or ribis. However, the person, if he was alive, would have to. So we see that you do return mois ribis. And the Gemara says no. The Gemara says no. Who adin that even he would not have to return the ribis as well. However, the reason why the brisa chose to talk about the Gershom is for a whole separate reason, as the Gemara goes on to explain. It's on the Sefer. The Sefer, the brisa talks about if there's something Mesuyam, if there's something which is very recognizable. He stole a specific thing, which is recognizable as a stolen thing. Then there's a special din that for the honor of the deceased, the honor to make covet of VM, the kids have to get rid of it. And the Gemara goes into dealing with that. Are you chayiv the covet of your father if he's a Russia? And the Gemara says he's talking about teshuva. The Gemara goes through those details and explains why that really the father would have to, the father would not have to return it based on the premise of our first brisa. And the reason why we're talking about the kids is for a very specific reason. Okay, the third brisa is also Tosefta. It says Hagazlanin Malva Berivis Afa Pisha Gavu Machzirin. So it's a very cryptic brisa. So that's the lashon of the brisa. The brisa says the Gazlanin Malva Berivis, even though they collected Machzirin. So the Gemara, as the Gemara, you have similar Mishnayos and other cases. In Kshubas, you have other places where it's like this. The Gemara asks, how is it shaykh to have collection gvia by a gazlan? If he stole it, he stole it. If he didn't steal it, he didn't steal it. What is his lashon shigavu? So the Gemara explains gazlanin umay niu malve ribius. The Gemara says gazlanin, and who are the gazlanin? Malve ribius. So meaning the Gemara is Mike in the Bryce is talking about malve ribius, that even though they collected the money already, they should return it. So this is according to the Shita that ribis kitzutza is yotze b'dayon. Is machlekes about Betzia about ribis deraisa if it's yotze b'dayon or not, and this is accordance with that opinion. Upon him, there's this brisa before is a shiur to our first brisa. Our first brisa says that ein mekablim mehem v'mekablim in ruach chacham neichei. So the Gemara answers the third brisa as beba latzos yidei shemayim. He's coming to be yotze yidei shemayim. So it's a very interesting idea over here. We'll stop and we'll discuss this for a second. We nafkamina halacha l'maskana, because this idea of balas ishmaim will be kaim l'maskana. Generally, when the Gemara says chiyuv, Gemara uses different terminologies. Sometimes it's chayiv latzis yishmayim, sometimes it's chayiv bebal latzis yidei shemayim, or bebal latzis yidei shemayim. There's different diukim. But upon him, generally, the way it works is that you have a chiyuv gomer. Let's say someone's mazik. He's chayiv to chiyuv teshlumin. However, let's say it's grama. So we say that at bedine adam, there's not enough to make him chayiv. However, bedine shemayim, if he wants to be a good person, if he wants to be yotze his din ben adam amakim, so he has to give it back. There's diyunim Rishonim. There's different ways to understand it. There's different nuances in chiyuv b'dei adam chiyuv b'dei shemayim. Are they two separate chiyuvim? Or is it the same sort of chiyuv? Just one of them basin has the power to enforce, the other one basin doesn't have the power to enforce. There's different mashmos in the Rishonim, but that's the standard. The sug whenever in Shas you have bebal latzis yidei shemayim, that's what it's talking about. Over here, l'chura, it's talking about something else entirely, because you have right now the pashtus, because you have a chiyuv. L'chura, the pashtus of the Gemara is that the chachamim were not mafkia. Even with takkanat, as we'll establish, whatever it's talking about, this takkanat that exists, this takkanat exists, the maskana, the first brisa that we brought, you have this takkanat. The chacham are just saying, don't take it, but he's still chayiv to you. He's still chayiv, and if he wants to take it, ein rocham neichemenu, but bedin, he can force, the Maggid Mishnah says, he will force the gazan to give it to him if he wants to. If he wants to go against the chacham, he has the power to do so. The chacham say ein rocham neichemenu, meaning the chacham were not mafkia. Sometimes the Chumar say hefker based in hefker. We never said hefker based in hefker over here. You're still chayiv. The Gazan's still chayiv. We're telling you be a nice guy. If I choose not to be a nice guy, our shoes be yadi. Fine. So and that is so the pash, and then there's a big nafkamina, the nafkamina for the Maggid Mishnah. If I choose to force him, or if I'm just toifas it, or if let's say the Gazan comes and said, I want to be latzis shemayim, I want to give it to you, and we'll get into a second if latzis shemayim you give it or don't, and I take it. And sorry, the other way around. If the Gazan says, "Oh, I'm going to give it to you, Medina," and I take it, and it turns out that if the din was that Medina the Chomer Mafkia the Chiyuv, so if he gave it to me, Betolos, he gave it to me on a mistaken premise. He thought that he had to give it Medina. It turns out it was just Lazdei Shemaim. So then you could start clearing, you could start, debating whether is that an Asina Betolos, is that a mistake given based on a mistaken premise or not. But the Pashtus is, and this is clear in the Rambam, could be other Rishonim argue the Pashtus is, and this is the Pashtus Halacha, that the Chomer were not Mafkia the Chiyuv, meaning the guy is still Chayav, the Gazan is still Chayav. There's a saying, mitzad the Makabel, you should be nice. Okay. So according to this, the Bala Tzidei Shemayim is a little interesting, right? It's not the classic understanding of Bala Tzidei Shemayim, where there's not a real chiyuv, there's a mix of chiyuv, there's a chiyuv, klape Shemayim, or whatever. Here there's a real chiyuv, which is Bala Tzidei Shemayim, is that is almost like mitzad the person coming to return it. Meaning, you should do a ma'aseh teshuva and coming to return it, even though the Chacham said that really things should remain as they are. So that's just an interesting point. Now, another point which has to be clarified about is the Balas Ishmaim, do we accept it or not? The Balas Ishmaim, how do you learn it? Balas Ishmaim meaning the Gazlan is coming to be from, right? He's coming to be from, and he's coming to say, even though I know the Chamid is takkanat for my benefit, that should be easy for me to do teshuva, and Mevakar Shlichel Mechila, etc., whatever teshuva encompasses, and I don't have to return it. However, I'm going to be firm. I'm showing my charata by coming with the money in my hand, my cap in my hand, my money in the other hand, and coming and trying to return it. If I'm not sitting in my house pretending to do teshuva, I'm actually coming to do teshuva. The question is, do we accept it or not? So there's a certain mashmos that we don't accept it, because earlier Tosfos earlier in the Gemara, in that second brisa, where the Gemara, that part I skipped over a little bit, where we say that the kids have a chiyuv make kavod aviyam. The Gemara asks from Psukkah that in a case where the father's a Russia, there's no chiyuv of kavod, or at least to a certain extent. The Gemara answers, "B'z asa tshuva." The Gemara asks, "Ibash asa tshuva my boy gabe." What's it doing by him? The Gemara says he wasn't able to give it back till he died, right? So Tosfos over there asks a very basic question. What do you mean? He wasn't able to give it back before he died. What do you mean? The whole sugya is you don't give it back. We don't take it back. What are you asking my boy gabe? What are you asking? Why is the money by him? The money is in his possession because the whole brisa is saying that you shouldn't return it. So that's why it's by him. So Tosfos gives different answers. There was 3 different answers, but the implication, Tosfos, none of the answers, Tosfos doesn't say balas yishmaim. So it sounds like that even by balas yishmaim you don't accept it. However, you could be doicha and say that Tosfos was before the answer balas yishmaim in the Gemara. I mean, the Gemara, we're viewing the Gemara as the 4 brisos, all at the same time. The Gemara develops them one by one, and could be that answer didn't come up yet. And in the Torah Shulchan Aruch, it's mavor that balas yishmaim, you accept it. And the Sma of Katan Gimel, I'm sort of jumping the gun over here and going to the Halacha, but just to explain the idea of balas yishmaim, the Sma has a very good dominion. The Sma in Katan Gimel says that balas yishmaim is the Ganem says, I know I'm patur medina, and nevertheless I want to give it to you, but Torah's balas yishmaim. In that case, we accept it. So meaning what we don't accept it is when he wants to give you Torah's dina. If he says that, I'm giving it to you, but Torah's chumrah, then we do accept it. He brings the dugma lazeh. He brings the dugma lazeh from earlier in Chodesh Mishpah. Earlier in Shulchan Aruch, we talk about Shemitah, where if the loiva comes and says, I know Shemitah is Meshamet, and I know I don't really owe you this money, nevertheless I want to give it to you anyway, so you can accept it. So he says the same idea over here. Upon him. So when all the dust settles, halacha l'maisa, Lazi de Shemaim is a real thing. Lazi de Shemaim, important thing number 1 is that it's a different Havana than Lazi de Shemaim in other places in the Gemara, the Pashtos. And number 2 is that it's not clear whether you accept it or not, but the halacha, you could take the money, and the Sma says it has to be in a very specific way. Okay, we'll revisit this once we masak on everything halacha, but this is something halacha which comes out from this part of the Gemara. So Nachamo, we have one brisa which is going to be the Yesod Sugya, which is enactment. Number 2, we had a brisa which is Niachlam Aviyam, which we were doicha. Which is doicha, we say taka aviyam nami, we would collect it for that. Brisa number 3, which we said that mekabel mehem, and we said no, that's balas yishmaim. We have Brisa number 4. Brisa number 4 says like this. Brisa also in Tisaf the Bamitzia says haroyim v'agabon v'amuchsin shivas and kasha. It's very hard for them to do tshuva. Umachzir l'makirin, and they would give it back to those they recognize. And the same for the Brisa says she'em makirin was that if they stole from people, someone spends his whole life stealing, and it's hard to keep track who they steal from. Yasa behind tzarchei tzibur, they do tzarchei tzibur, and the Gemara explains that's bar shechem aris. He makes these public, water bars with shechem aris, or different types of what's it called? Wells and pits that had water for the Tevis Tzibur. Okay, you do public works, infrastructure. Okay, so from this brisa, the Gemara says this brisa is clear that that from the ratio you accept it. That Machzir l'Makir. And the Gemara first wants to say, that's also talking about balas yishmaim. The Gemara rejects it. The Gemara says you cannot say this last brisa is talking about balas yishmaim. Why? if that's the case, if it's Bala Zishmaim, I might Chuvas and Kasha. Chuvas and Kasha is mashma that you have to go and find and give it back. If it's Bala Zishmaim, it's not so hard. Fine. Number two, the Gemara asks that from the Seifa, it's clear that they're actually doing stuff with the money. They're returning the money. It's not like, oh, Ein Makirin, and therefore what am I going to do? The Gemara says you're clearly spending that money, and it's Ki'ilu. It's the next best to giving it back. You're giving it to the public, and so we see that they're actually spending the money. So that's a stira. So the Gemara gives two answers. One of them is kan kodim takana, kan achar takana, meaning that this brisa was said before the takana, meaning that takana has a very specific starting point. It's actually very interesting. In halacha, we have takanas, and a lot of times the starting point is clear, and a lot of times the starting point is not clear. And if you discuss these vast machlekes and distinctions about hundreds of years about when these takanas started. I just for example, off the top of my head in Yeridea about Dam Chimud, the Taz over there has interesting historical shitas about when the takana of Dam Chimud started. So, and as machlekes, I'm saying, so here as well, we hear this here in our Gemara is a very specific starting point. It may Rebbe Nishmas, and that's when the takana started. And this brisa predates that. Okay. Now, the other answer to the Gemara is that the whole takana is only when the gzela is not be'ain. When the gzela is be'ain, they never made a takana, you accept it. And therefore, our first brisa, which says we don't accept it, that's talking about the gzela is not be'ain, where it's already not be'ain anymore. And the pashtus is, it was nechal or something like that. It's totally not be'ain. There's a dion in the Mefarshim. What happens if shinu koina, right? What happens? So a gazlan, he steals something. The pasuk says the heishav s'gzela. The Gemara in Bava Kama is doirish on the pasuk. The heishav s'gzela shel gazal. In ke'ein shel gazal yachzer. If the gzela is still in its original state, that without any shinoi, without a real shinoi, then you should be machzir the gzela itself. Then lav damim ba'omal ba'yishlume. The Gemara Bava Kama says is derish that otherwise you just have to pay money. So there's certain ways that the gazlan is koina l'gamri the gneva, the gzela, and then only gives back damim. So the din of the Mefarshim about over here, in such a case, if the takana applies or not. But the pashtus is, let's just say the pashtus is kishanecha. Okay. So then the Gemara says, one second, how could you tell me that? You have the original brisa. The original brisa says that the wife tells the husband, even your belt is not going to belong to you. So the Gemara says that's talking about the value of the belt. Okay. Now the Gemara ends off with one more question, then we'll get into the sugyas harishonim. So the Gemara ends off with one more question. The Gemara says you have mereish, you have the main beam of a building where even though the gzela is kayemes, nevertheless, the Chacham said you shouldn't return it. And the Gemara says, yeah, that's a specific din of mereish that since it's so. In order to return the guf hadavar, you'll have to take apart the whole building. And then Takaz Hashavim made a special takana. Okay, Ad considers the Gemara. So to recap, you have four brises. And the maskana is like this. The maskana is the first brisa is chavikam. The first brisa is that we have a special takana that ain mekablim. That's step number one. Step number two is from the whole Shakav Gemara. The maskana we establish whatever is a starting point for the takana. Okay, that's pretty obvious. We also establish that the takana is only by a davar she'ein be'ein, not davar she'be'ein, and that is brought halacha by the Rosh and the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. That is the psak halacha. So that's step number two. So nachos, this is a takana, and that takana started at a certain time, and that takana is only by davar she'ein be'ein. If the gzela is still kayames, then there's no problem taking it back. Okay, and point number three, which comes out from the Guf Divrei Gemara, which everyone agrees to, is this inyan of balas shemayim. Even when the takana applies, nevertheless, we could override the takana if he wants a balas shemayim. And we discussed that what exactly that looks like in the maskana lahalacha. You actually could take it as long as there's a certain formulation the Gazlan says, as the Sma explains, that he comes and say, I know that I'm pater I'm not coming to do this now pater. I know because really there's layers. On a thin level of hashas he's high. Nevertheless, the Chacham say you shouldn't do it. So he's saying that I know the Chacham say I shouldn't do it, and I'm doing it with Torah as chumrah. Afal pikein, in such a case we accept it. Okay. So ad kan sugya sugya. Now this is a very fascinating sugya in the sense that the Rishonim take this whole sugya b'skira achas and ask them the closest sugya, and you have different answers. The Rishonim, and this is not from the halacha. So let's begin. So the Rishonim, Tosfos, and the Rush primarily have some very basic fundamental questions on the Klaus HaSugya. They say like this. So Tosfos says, what do you mean? What do you mean in Makabel? Ma'asim b'chol yom, they were done din exelis. Tosfos says that we're done din exelis all the time. I don't know what you're talking about. The question from the minog that was nog b'halacha b'zmanei. Then Tosfos says, what do you mean? All over in Gemara we find redundant exelis. I don't know what you're talking about. You're saying, but may Rebbe, ever from Rebbe the Elach, you never take any exela back. You have all these cases in Gemara where we're done din exelis. Tosfos brings a bunch of different cases. Gemara brings later on Baba Kama that certain person stole a yoke of oxen, and Rav Nachman was done and made to give it back, and a whole story over there. Later on in Baba Kama Kuftas Vav that there was a certain person who stole a sefer and Abaya was done. And Baba Metzia had a story with a certain Roya who stole the whole flock and the whole din in the sugi over there of Helach, and Reb Zera is dining. And in Baba Basra, Lama Gimel is a famous case of Nasser Abba where he's chataf Mefanenu. No, we were in chatvi, v'di chatvi. This is basically someone stole something, and nevertheless, Rav Nachman is done it. And Baba Metzia. In Ezra Neshach, we say so the Pashas Kol Hashas, you look all over, we're accepting, we're Mekabel Gzela. What's going on over here? Tosfos asks further that and those cases, some of them the thing is Ba'in, some of them it's not Ba'in. You can't answer simply, all those cases are talking about the Gzela Ba'in. It's very clearly not the case. Okay. Fine. So, and also, just to add a point, even the cases we're talking about Be'ain, the Gemara is Mitzad that gives this answer. Before the answer is Muchach, right? Before that would be Muchach. Fine. Furthermore, Tosfos asks, is why are we not bringing a question for the Mishnah? The Mishnah says, the Mishnah of beginning of Gazal says, the Mishalman Kishas Gzela. Why are you not saying Mishalman Kishas Gzela? Even though you could, over there also, you could say, Kan Koyim Takana, Kan Acher Takana. The Gemara should have brought it. The Gemara should have brought it and answered that. The Gemara totally ignored that. Okay, so those are the questions. The questions are Ma'asim b'chol yom redundant exelis. You look all the way throughout Shas, redundant exelis, bein shaleba, and it doesn't seem to bother us in the sugi at all. And point number 3 is why not bring right for the Mishnah, other Mishnayos, which talk about Mishalman Tashlum Exela, and it sounds like we're accepting it. Okay, so those are the questions we're trying to. Again, you see how this is a fundamental question in the whole sugya, right? This whole sugya is dealing with Minei Ubei. The sugya is talking with the Nipratim different prices. But the whole Yesod is problematic. So there's B'derech Klal 3 shitas of the Rishonim. We'll see which ones are brought halacha l'maisa. So Tosfos b'shem Rabbeinu Tam, and this is in the Sefer Yashar as well, is a really fascinating answer. Tosfos says, take a look at the Gemara. The Gemara says, B'mei Rebbe Nishnas Mishnazu. So Rabbeinu Tam says, what is this telling me? Rabbeinu Tam has a shita, a fascinating shita. He says, any place in Shas where it says B'mei Pliny Nishnas Mishnazu, which Tosfos brings it for 3 other cases, could be there more. It means that this takkanat was made for specifically that dar, loy lefanav, loy la'acharav. Meaning it was made specifically for that dar. So therefore, Rabbeinu Tam says it's not a problem. Rebbe saw in his dar there was a specific problem. He made a takkanat LTD. There was a limited takkanat. Now it'd be interesting, when to Chum make a takkanat, when to make a takkanat which is limited. Okay, so the takkanat which is limited. He made a takkanat for his dar, and however you define dar, he made that takkanat, and therefore all the questions fall away. L'chura. You have all the questions from Mishnayos, that's too early, as we'll explain in a second. And the ones from the Gemara are too late. So Tosfos actually Medayek, from the Rabbeinu Tam's Medayek, that all these brises are from the Tosefta. So Rebbe, he says something fascinating. He says, that in the Gemara, we only bring brises, bring Toseftas that Ruchia taught. We don't ask for Mishnah, which says Mishal Mishas Zela. Lefi, Shamishnayos, so Kodim Rebbe. Mishnayos predated Rebbe. Elish Rebbe Sidron. Rebbe was just Mesader them. Right? Mishnayos are older Torahs from Rebbe, from others. Mesader the teachings of Torah Shabbat Peh in a organized, non-sifra sifri Torah Shabbat fashion, but rather in halachas. As Gemara and Gittin explains different types of Tanam, the different sort of orders they had. And Rebbe came and was malakid and was Mesader them as a mavur. This is in the Gemara, the first mission of Pshachim. It references older Mishnayos, which is not in the Mishnayos, right? When it's talking about the Martiv, right? The Mishnah references something which is not even in the Mishnah. So the Sefer Krisos and other Klalei Gemara explain that the Mishnah is referencing to an old version of the Mishnah which didn't make the final cut. So so therefore Rebbe didn't talk to Mishnayos because the Mishnayos are a siddur of older statements. However, Brisus, it's very interesting. Brisus are not older stuff that necessarily didn't make the cut. These are things that Rebbe Me'atzmoi was moisev on the Mishnah. It's a very interesting line in Tosfos. But Al-Kapanim le'inyan ar sugya. I'm sure the academics make a big deal of this. Anyway, le'inyan ar sugya, Rabbeinu Tam says that this is why it's not random why we're asking questions from Toseftas and from Brisus and we're ignoring the Mishnayos. And it's not random why we don't have a problem with all the places in Shas where we see Amiroim being done to Xela. Because Rebbe made a very limited takkanat, and that takkanat was was just for his dar. So therefore, after his dar, it's totally irrelevant. So according to Rabbeinu Tam, this whole Gemara is beautiful, but has a very specific shelf life. It is from Yimei Rebbe, whatever CE, until Seif Yimei Rebbe, whenever that was, and that's it. And then nowadays it should be totally irrelevant, according to Rabbeinu Tam. Okay. Now, just one question on Rabbeinu Tam. I didn't see before we deal with this, but L'chura, the end of the Sugya Gemara asks for Merish. The Gemara says, you have the Merish, which is you don't return even if it's Ba'ain. It's a Mishnah. That shouldn't bother us, just like all the other Mishnahs didn't bother us. It's not a question of Rabbeinu Tam. I didn't see, I'm sure Mefarshim deal with it. I didn't see dealing with that question according to Shittas Rabbeinu Tam. I think it's a good question. Okay, so that is Shittas Rabbeinu Tam. Next answer, the Rishonim bring. Tosfos says b'shem Ri that the Ri he discusses half of Tosfos' question. He doesn't really discuss all the cases of the Gemara, which Tosfos brought, which show Amiroim being done didn't exalis, but rather he discusses the Mishnah. He says he can't prove from the Mishnah because he says Rebbe's takana is not limited as man, not like Rabbeinu Tam, but it's limited in scope. He says he made the takana only for ma'oisam b'nei adam shroiv iskam u'mechiyasam b'kach v'yunezoyne begezel v'ribis u'misparnesim b'chol kol yimei chayim. Fine. B'kach kol yimei chayim. So the Ri says that's only for not someone who went by the corner store and walked off with a pack of, I don't know, so what's it called, chocolates or something. So by someone who for 50 years he was doing this. This was what he did. He did waste management, and this is what he did. And he stole, and most of his money, all of his money, everything is what's it called? Everything is from Gezel, from Ribis, and this is mamish like the story of Rebbe, where the woman tells him truthfully, if you're coming to do teshuva, you're going to be penniless and be broke. Your entire fortune is built on the misfortune of others, right? Every dollar you have was taken from someone else by hook or by crook. So Rebbe says, Bimidai from the story, Rebbe's takana was a very specific type of takana for a very specific type of gazlan. Okay. The rush, and it brings two answers, and we'll say the second answer, the first answer in a second. But the second answer he says like she just read. Fine. And the Ri says this is also mashma what it says in all the brides we bring hagazlanu malvei ribis and rayim, and everything we bring. All these cases are what's it called? Are talking about someone whose Rav Asik is in this. Fine. And the Mishnah we could talk about by someone who stole Bakarai. He stole Chad Pami. It was one time thing. Okay. So the Ri, as I said, the Ri didn't deal with the Gemaras. So from Riyata, maybe the Ri is agreeing with Rabbeinu Tam partially, and he's just coming to answer the Mishnah. The Rush and the Torah Shulchan Aruch bring the answer of the Ri l'der. So it's clear they don't learn Shittas Ri as being predicated on Rabbeinu Tam. So it's not clear all these Gemara. So all these Gemaras. So some of the Gemaras you could say the Ri is madachik and say that they're talking about Karaya is a one-time thing. But it's hard to clear because Gemara in Bava Metzia is talking about Raya. And also later on in Daf Tzadik Vav, with a story where the guy stole a yoke of oxen, Rav Nachman says, so there's a whole back and forth with the Gemara, and Rav Nachman says clearly this guy is a Gazlana Atika. He's an old Gazlan. I want to be kind of him. Fine. So we see according to this, the whole viewpoint of Rav Nachman would be opposing to this whole sugya, because in this sugya, the worse the guy is, the more we want to help him. We want to help him make the teshuva easier. Over there, Gazlana Atika, we want to be kind of him. maybe you could say the Re holds that there are three targets. It's very difficult to say. Sometimes the Re, Tosfos and the Re specifically is very fond of the answer. You have all over Shas. You have Tosfos which say Shalosh Chalkus B'Davar. You have other places, a bunch of places where Tosfos has a question. The Gemara says we really have three categories. Not as there are three specific categories. You have Tosfos all over say that. But over here, it's hard to say that. It's hard to say because again, I'll read the lashon of Re. Re says over here we're talking about someone who's Roiv Iskom and Mechias and Mekach when he's zoning Megaz Rubis Misparnis and Mekach Koymeim. You know, say there's a difference between that and Gazlan and Atika. It's fair. Okay. So another question on the Re. And Oid Sarach Bir, that the Re says, all the cases we brought in our sugya are talking about someone who's Asik is Mekach. So 3 out of 4 check out. But the brisa of Aniach Lamaviyam, where's it mavur in that brisa that we're talking about someone who was a professional gazel? Maybe it's someone who's Bakrai Ba'alma. So the Rush, when he brings this to answer the Re, he Derech Agav answers this question. The Rush says the Ad Moisin is Asagurubis. This guy died. The last thing he was doing, he wasn't saying Vido, he wasn't doing this. The last stuff he was doing, he had ribis till his last breath. So it's clear that he was this sort of fellow, and that's a beautiful halacha that this guy is also someone who's Roiv Asik is Bekal. Okay, so that's the second shita. The third shita is the Rush. The Rush says that the takkanat is only when someone comes to do tshuva. If the guy is oimed, the Rush on the Rush is if he's oimed b'mirdoi, the guy Gazlan, he's sitting there and he doesn't want to do tshuva, then we take it from by force. If he wants to do tshuva, then we'll accept him. We'll accept him and accept his tshuva and say, we don't want to accept the money. Very interesting answer. So meaning, when the guy doesn't want to do tshuva, we take the money. When he does want to do tshuva, we don't take the money. Which makes a lot of sense. The whole point of this takkanat is to make tshuva easier. If the guy doesn't want to do tshuva, more than you don't want to do tshuva, we don't want you to do tshuva. We take it away from you. Okay. And he says this is what all the places that the Rush discusses the case of the Gemara, all those 5 cases Tosfos brought. He says all those cases it's clear, and it's a very good point. The guy didn't want tshuva. There was someone there was someone who was perfectly happy with what he was doing. Okay. So the shverkeit in the Rush is that in this whole sugya, we ask, we see they're chayav lahachzir. There's the easiest answer in the world. Say that he's oimid b'mirda. Meaning it's very shver according to the again. I didn't look deeply into enough to see what the answers are. I didn't see Mefarshim deal with it explicitly. I'm sure there are, but the easiest answer in the world is oimid b'mirda. Right? Meaning, how can all the bright we had the whole sugya Gemara is saying, how can you say chayav lahachzir? We say emekablan according to the Rush is an easy answer. This guy's umirda, this guy's not. And for Karet, the Rush as the Rush was medayik in his other answer, the Rush was medayik that the guy died umirda. So we see that's the case. That's what's going on over here. The Re brings something similar to the Rush's answer and says you can't explain that. First of all, the term Gazlan Malvi Ribis isn't mashma like that. As he said earlier, it's not mashma kreba. And also, that each person, if the whole thing is contingent on someone doing tshuva, so pretend to do tshuva. I'll say, I'm doing tshuva, and all of a sudden he's safe. Okay. I'll go upon him, that is the question. So now we have 3 shitas. Each of the shitas has its problems. I'll go upon him with 3 shitas. The Rambam writes like this. Rambam says in the Parak Aleph Al Gimel. Kol hagoizel es chavera shavprota. Whoever steals from his friend that filu shavprota, filu noitel l'shmasim menu, as the Gemara says elsewhere in Baba Kama. Okay. Then the Rambam continues and says, Afal pikein im loy hoysa gzela kemas v'rasa gazla and lasas tshuva. If the gzela was not the aim, and the gazla wants to do tshuva, ubame Allah v'hichsed me gzela. Takanas chachamim hi she'em ekalim ganu elo oizer noiser meichel like kedei l'kar v'der kishal l'shavim. So if the gzela is not the aim, step number 1, and he wants to do tshuva, and he comes by himself, and he's mavzed mevela, so Chacham not to do it. Okay, so it's clear that he holds like the Rush, because it's talking about even someone who's gazel shav prota, not a gazlan before some, not like the Re, not like the second answer to the Rush. We're not talking about gazlan before some. We're talking about someone who even a chad pami sort of guy, and nevertheless, and b'meyatzma. So it's clear that the Rambam learns like that. Okay, inyan halacha. So I'm going to get the Shulchan Aruch. Inyan halacha, the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch paskin like both answers of the Rush. So this is interesting. This sometimes you have in halacha where you have shitas harishonim which are predicated on different questions they have on the sugya, and nevertheless we take all of them halacha. Here's a little interesting that both of them are brought in the rush, and both of them are taking the halacha. You have this in Hilchos Shabbos as well. There's a certain question in the Gemara about kibbutz and libun and getting clothing wet on Shabbos. Is that considered libun or not? In the Gemara, the Rishonim have three general mahalchim, and all three are brought halacha. So it's very interesting where it comes, and you see the Makaris for that in the Gemara are not clear. It's almost we had a problematic Gemara. The Rishonim give different options, and the halacha we take certain ones. So let's read the Shulchan Aruch, and we'll see exactly where everything comes from. Says the Chosh Mishpat Shin Samach Vav Sif Aleph. Gazam Aforsum. The Rama adds Shasaka Bakach Drasakasha. This is what he did full time. So this is like the answer of the Re, which is brought in the rush. Habalas is teshuva me'atzma. So that's the second component of the rush. So we see that we need the halacha. We need both aspects of the rush. In exam as we said that it's talking about kshein and be'ain. And the common that's the takkanat. So from that line of the Gemara, we can read the Shulchan Aruch. No clue what it's based off of. Very simple line, but what is it based off of? So we have a takkanat. We don't hold like rabbinic tam. We hold that it's taka loylam vod. We hold that as dafka, as the Gemara says, dafka something which is not be'ain. And we hold of both reasons of the rush, which the mucker of the rush is the question on the whole sugis of Gemara. And he gave two answers. We take both answers. So therefore, nachamo. So there is a takkanat. Number two is the takkanat is dafka something which is not be'ain. Number three is, you have a question, Gemara, how can you have such a Gemara if you have Gemaras all over which say that we are Makabel? So you have two answers to the rush, and we take both of them. Answer number one is Gazam Aforsum. Answer number two is Bami Atzmai. Okay. Kadesh even if last teshuva, not to hold him back from doing teshuva. Vim Russell lots of Deshmaim. If he wants to be Yotzi Deshmaim, the Hechster. We're not Meichas. We see the Shulchan Aruch says that Baal Deshmaim, you're Makabel, and the smell over here explains, as I said earlier, that you have to say in a very specific formulation. The Rama says, so that's what the Rama paskins that Mikra din Yerchayev and is Chayev lahachser. And there just will end off. The Shach says something very interesting from the Sefer Chassidim. The Shach says that this whole din applies when the Nigzal doesn't owe anyone money. If the Nigzal owes someone money, we're not going to say, oh, be from and help this guy do teshuva, and don't take the money, and you end up messing over the people you owe money to. I mean, being from is on your own cheshbon and not on other people's cheshbon. And therefore, the Shach says, Adkan.